My question is to the Minister for Tertiary Education. How does removing $55 million from industry training help the growth of the productive economy?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the government has a view that it wants to get value for money out of every dollar it spends on behalf of taxpayers. I appreciate that's still a novel view in some quarters. As part of securing value for money in the tertiary sector, we have reviewed the industry training budget and found $55 million over 2 years not being used effectively in that sector. That money is now being used to fund almost 3,000 more full-time student places, with little, if any, effect on industry training because the funding was underutilised or in some cases not being utilised at all. This, I believe, Mr Speaker, is a sensible, prudent use of taxpayers' money which will help the growth of the productive economy.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. In making its decision to cut $55 million from industry training, was any consideration given to the government's role in avoiding future skill shortages? And if so, did that include using the money to provide incentives to employers to take on more trainees?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member may not be aware, but the government has an incentive in place where it pays roughly 70% or in some cases more of the cost of industry training, the cash version. The member may be interested to find out that roughly 100,000 of the registered industry trainees in New Zealand achieved no credits in 2009, 100,000 achieved no credits in 2008, and 44,000 of them achieved no credits across 2008 and 2009. Now, I think it is appropriate for the government to review that situation and spend industry training budgets more wisely.
Carol Beaumont.
To the Minister, supplementary. What impact does the Minister think cutting $55 million from industry training will have on lifting the skills level of those already in work who will make up 80% of the workforce of 10 years' time? And what new initiatives has this government implemented to lift the skills levels of those already in work?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, if the member had been listening to the answer to the previous supplementary question, they would have known that something like 44,000 of the people that were being paid for out of the industry training budget across 2008 and 2009 achieved no credits whatsoever, and therefore removing of that funding will have absolutely nil impact on the training and skills going forward. I would also point out to the member that some of the money, in fact some of the money in 2010 and 2011, is not currently being allocated, and so therefore shifting it to where it can be used makes reasonable amount of sense.
Carol
Point of order, Mr Speaker. I asked in that question what new initiatives has this government implemented to lift the skills level of those already in work, and I don't believe the Minister even began to address that.
Order. What makes it extraordinarily difficult for me, the level of interjection from members' own colleagues in front of her meant I couldn't hear clearly that question. I nearly intervened, but I thought it's the responsibility of her own members to let her question be heard. Under those circumstances, I cannot assist her, and her colleagues should be a little more thoughtful when their own backbench members are asking questions.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, there was some noise from my left.
Indeed there was. The member sitting right on his left.
The noise came from Paul Quinn at the back corner.
Order. I will deal with these matters, not National Party front benches, including the Leader of the House. Now, I made my decision because the Deputy Leader of his party, was interjecting very loudly while her colleague was seeking to ask a question. I could not hear the detail of the question. Members will learn to be disciplined if they want. Ministers who answer their questions, they should make sure the Speaker can hear them. I always try to make sure that the discipline falls in the right place in this House and doesn't have me interfering all the time. If members want their questions heard, they know the best way to remedy that. Grant Robertson, point of order.
Mr Speaker, not in any way challenging that ruling, but I do note that each of the answers that the Minister has given in his answer to the questions today has begun with a flick at the opposition at relatively straight questions, and I just ask for consistency in that ruling.
Order. When I went through these questions, the member may be interested to know the one primary question today that I put a political connotation beside was this particular question. And I'm not surprised the Minister has taken a small flick in answering it, because the member doesn't need to have been in this House a long time to see the political implications of this question. A supplementary question, Carol Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree with New Zealand Manufacturers and Export Association Chief Executive John Wally that, quote, trade skills are one of the main drivers of productivity, especially for a country with a small population, close quote? If so, how does he think cutting $55 million from industry training will help drive productivity?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, while I often don't agree with Mr Wally, I can agree with that statement, but I note for the member that that's actually a truism. Yes, building skill levels is important. It makes absolutely no comment on the correct amount to spend. And quantity does not necessarily imply quality. And what the member seems to be suggesting is that any amount of money is better than any less amount of money, no matter what it is actually spent on. And that's a bit the problem with the previous Labour government.
Question number 8, Chris Ockenvold.